She looked at me with tears in her eyes, and yet she closed the door. That was the moment everything ended for me. I was just a child, waiting for protection, waiting for love, waiting for the arms of a mother who should have fought for me. Instead, she handed me to the very monster who would strip away my innocence, my safety, and the belief that family means shelter. People think betrayal only comes from strangers or from husbands who break vows. But the deepest betrayal is when the person who gave you life chooses to look away while you are being destroyed. That night was the first time I understood what loneliness really was. And it was the first night I began to die inside. My name is Ana Clara Rodriguez. I am 72 years old now. Most people here in the small town of Amarillo, Texas, just call me Mrs. Clara. To the neighbors, I am the woman who bakes pies, who sells jars of jam at the farmer's market, who always has a smile on her face, even on the coldest days. They see me as a fragile old lady with steady hands and a kind voice. They cannot imagine that behind my quiet life lies a history so heavy it bends my bones, even now. They do not see that every time I roll out dough or stir sugar into boiling fruit, I am fighting memories that claw at me in the silence of the night. When you reach my age, people expect you to talk about grandchildren, recipes, or memories of dancing on Saturday nights. I have those memories, yes, but they are buried under something darker. Every wrinkle on my face carries more than time. It carries silence. It carries nights I prayed to vanish. It carries mornings when I looked at the mirror and could not recognize the girl staring back. The pies I sell on Sundays smell sweet, but to me, they also carry the smell of burned wood from a kitchen that became my prison, the same smell that followed me every time he came near. I grew up believing mothers are protectors. I believed that no matter what, a mother would step in front of danger for her child. I believed that because that is what mothers are supposed to be. But I learned early that belief does not always match reality. Some mothers are not shields. They are mirrors of their own fears, willing to sacrifice their children to keep a man happy, to keep a house together, to keep an image of normal life for the neighbors. My mother was one of them. She chose silence instead of courage, obedience instead of love. And I was the one who paid the price for that choice. There are moments in life that carve themselves into your memory so deeply that even decades later you can hear the sounds and feel the air on your skin. I still hear the sound of that wooden door closing. It was slow, almost gentle, but it felt like the loudest slam in the world. I remember the way the floor creaked under her shoes as she walked away. I remember the faint smell of soap from her hands because she had just finished washing dishes. I remember the way my body froze, how my throat closed, how every muscle begged me to scream, but no sound came out. That silence was the loudest scream of my life. People often ask me why I never ran, why I never shouted, why I never told anyone sooner. They do not understand that fear is not just a feeling, it is a prison. When someone bigger and stronger than you controls every door, every word, every move, the idea of escaping feels impossible. And when your own mother stands on the other side of that prison and refuses to open the door, you stop believing that rescue is possible at all. You stop believing in people. You stop believing in hope. As a child, I used to love the sound of my mother humming while she cooked. It meant safety. It meant normal life. But after that night, every sound in the house became twisted. The click of a lock meant danger. The squeak of the floor meant footsteps coming closer. The silence of my mother's voice meant abandonment. Even now, 60 years later, when I hear a door close softly, my chest tightens as if time has folded and I am back in that small room again, waiting for the nightmare to start. What I want you to understand is that pain does not only come from bruises or from the cruel hands of an abuser. The deepest wounds are carved by betrayal. Betrayal turns a home into a battlefield. Betrayal teaches a child that love is dangerous, that trust is poison, that safety is a lie. And when it is your mother who betrays you, that wound never fully heals. It becomes a scar you carry even when you smile, even when you laugh, even when the world thinks you have moved on. For years I carried this story like a stone in my chest, too heavy to speak of. People would see me at the market, smiling as I handed them a slice of pie, and they thought they knew me. But they never knew the nights I woke up drenched in sweat because the memory of that door kept replaying in my mind. They never knew the way I avoided looking into Mother's eyes, because every time I did, I wondered, would she have done the same? Would she have closed the door too? Even now, when I sit in my kitchen and watch the steam rise from a pot of boiling sugar, I sometimes catch myself staring into the fog, as if I am back in that past, trapped in that small house where love and fear lived side by side. And I think of that child I was, the child who believed her mother would save her, the child who learned in one cruel moment that some mothers choose men over their daughters, that some mothers would rather betray their own blood than face their own loneliness. That was the night I stopped being a child. That was the night I understood that I was alone in the world. And it was the night when silence became my only language. Silence that would last for years. Silence that would shape every choice I made. My childhood began like many others in small towns across America. The world seemed simple then. I played in the yard with a jump rope made from old pieces of cloth tied together. I chased butterflies in the heat of summer and made dolls out of corn husks and scraps of fabric my mother no longer used. The house was small but clean, the kind of place where the floorboards smelled of pine soap on Saturday mornings, and the kitchen always carried the faint aroma of coffee. From the outside, it looked like a home that belonged to a happy family. But even in those early years, I could feel something hidden, a tension that sat heavy in the air, something a child could not fully name but instinctively feared. My mother was known as a woman of faith. She carried her Bible in one hand and a set of graded papers in the other. She was a teacher, respected, admired, a woman who spoke softly in church but with authority in the classroom. People in town thought of her as a model of discipline and virtue. I used to look at her and imagine she was carved out of stone, strong, unshakable, someone who would never bend under the weight of the world. Yet inside our home, her silence was louder than any sermon. She was rigid, cold, and always reminded me that obedience was not a choice, but a duty. When she introduced the man who would change everything, the neighbors saw it as a blessing. A hard-working man, serious, always polite in public, with a firm handshake and the kind of voice that carried confidence. To outsiders, he seemed dependable, the kind of presence a widow or single mother could rely on. To me, even as a child, there was something unsettling about the way his eyes lingered too long. At first, I could not put words to it. I only knew that when he walked into a room, I wanted to shrink, to disappear into the background. It began with little things that most people would dismiss. He would comment on my appearance, not in the way a father figure would, but in ways that made me shift uncomfortably. He told me to sit straighter, to walk differently, to smile when I did not want to. His words sounded like corrections, but his eyes said something else, something that made me want to hide. Children often notice things adults pretend not to see. I noticed the way his tone changed when my mother was not in the room. I noticed the way his hand brushed too close when he passed me something at the table. I noticed how quickly he looked away whenever someone else entered the room. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was just being foolish, that grown-ups acted in ways children could not understand. But deep down, my body knew. Children always know. Fear is not taught, it is felt. My chest tightened whenever I heard his footsteps on the porch. I learned to measure the sound of his boots against the wooden floor, to predict his mood from the rhythm of his walk. It was a survival instinct growing inside me, long before I understood what survival meant. The first time it happened, it was nighttime. My mother had gone to church for a late service. She never missed a prayer meeting, never missed a chance to show her devotion. I was left alone in the house with him. The air felt different that night, heavy and waiting. I remember holding a small doll in my arms, a gift my mother had stitched from leftover fabric. I clutched it like it was my shield. He came into my room quietly, but his presence filled the space like a storm. He closed the door behind him and the sound was soft, almost careful. But in my ears, it was thunder. I did not understand what was about to happen, but my body froze. Every part of me screamed danger. He spoke to me in a tone I had never heard before. His voice was low, demanding, and his eyes were fixed on me in a way that made me feel like I was not a child anymore, but an object. My hands trembled so hard I dropped the doll on the floor. He told me to come closer. I wanted to run, but my legs would not move. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked tight. All I could do was obey, because he had the power, and I was just a little girl. That night was the first time the innocence of my childhood shattered. I did not have the language to describe what was done to me. I only knew that it was wrong, that it hurt, and that I felt dirty in a way no soap could wash away. I remember lying in bed afterward, my small body shaking, clutching the blanket like it could protect me, tears soaking into the pillow. I thought maybe it was just a punishment for something I had done, a one-time punishment. Children believe that bad things happen because they deserve them, and I was no different. But the worst part came when my mother returned home. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to run into her arms, cry, and beg her to save me. I opened my mouth, but the fear was too strong. He had already whispered threats into my ear, telling me what would happen if I spoke. My heart pounded so violently I could barely breathe. When she entered the room and asked why I was still awake, I just shook my head. She told me to go to sleep and close the door. That silence crushed me. That silence confirmed what I already feared, that in this house, my pain did not matter. From that night on, the air in our home changed forever. Every shadow became a warning. Every silence became a trap. I began to live with a constant weight in my chest, waiting for the next time, knowing it would come. Childhood should be a time of wonder, of laughter, of believing the world is kind. Mine became a time of counting footsteps, memorizing patterns, and praying each night for a miracle that never came. The memory of that first night is not only about the act itself, but about the moment I realized that safety was an illusion. That is the night when fear became my companion, and I understood in a way no child should, that my home was no longer a place of shelter. It was a cage, and once the door had closed behind me, there was no escaping it. The days after that first night blended into each other until time itself lost meaning. Every morning, I woke up with the same knot in my stomach, a dread so heavy it made my small body ache. I began to count the hours by the sound of his boots against the floor and the echo of my mother's silence. Childhood should have been measured by school bells, by laughter, by games played under the sun, but mine was measured by the rhythm of fear. Fear became my clock, and each tick reminded me that another night was coming. At first I convinced myself that it had been a one-time punishment. Children believe that pain is deserved, that adults always know best. So I told myself that maybe I had done something wrong, and that once I learned to behave, it would stop. But it did not stop. It grew. What began as a moment in the dark turned into a routine, a ritual, something that crept into every corner of my existence. It was no longer a question of if, but when. He always found a reason. A dish not washed properly, a book left on the table, a grade that was not high enough. Small things, insignificant things, became excuses for something far worse. And each time it happened, the excuses grew thinner, until eventually he no longer bothered with them. He did not need a reason anymore. He owned the silence of the house, and in that silence, anything was allowed. The cruelty was not only in the acts themselves, but in the way he twisted words to make me believe it was my fault. He told me I was careless, lazy, unworthy. He told me my mother would never love me if I disobeyed him, and with every word, my sense of self shrank smaller and smaller. Abuse is not only about what is done to the body, it is about how it reshapes the mind, how it convinces you that you deserve nothing better. One night, while it was happening, I looked up and saw something that froze me more than his hands ever could. Through the crack of the door, my mother was standing in the hallway. For a brief second, our eyes met. My own eyes screamed for help, begged her to stop what was happening. She looked at me with tears streaming down her face, but instead of stepping in, instead of fighting for me, she quietly pulled the door shut. That soft click of wood against wood was louder than thunder. It was the sound of betrayal. In that moment, I understood that I was not only fighting him, I was also abandoned by her. It is hard to describe what it feels like to be a child realizing that your mother will not protect you. It is like falling from a cliff and discovering there is no ground, only endless air. I felt my stomach twist, my heart pound, and something inside me crack in a way that could never be fixed. From then on, she was not only silent, she became complicit. As the months passed, the abuse escalated. He grew bolder, crueler, no longer waiting for her to leave the house. Sometimes she sat in the kitchen, pretending to be busy, while I cried quietly in my room. Other times, she created the opportunity herself. She told me to bathe, to prepare, as if she were setting a stage for him. The betrayal deepened each time, not only because she did nothing, but because her silence became a tool in his hands. It was no longer just him against me. It was both of them against a little girl who had no way out. The house itself became a weapon. The walls felt closer each day. The creak of the floorboards warned me he was coming. The shadow of the lamp in the hallway was the signal that the night was about to begin. The sound of water running in the bathroom meant my mother was nearby, but never near enough to save me. Every detail of the house turned into a trigger until there was no place where I felt safe, not even under my own blanket. I learned to live in two worlds. On the outside, I was quiet, polite, the girl who kept her head down at school. Teachers noticed I was distant, but no one asked too many questions. In those days, people did not believe that evil could hide inside a family. Problems at home were not to be spoken of. On the inside, I was a prisoner, calculating how to survive another night, trying to find ways to make myself smaller, invisible, untouchable. Children are not supposed to carry secrets that big. Secrets like that burn inside the chest, suffocating every breath. But I carried it because I had no choice. I carried it because the very person who should have shared my pain chose instead to lock it away. The memory that returns most often is not only the pain, but that look in my mother's eyes the night she closed the door. A look that mixed sorrow and cowardice. A look that told me she saw what was happening and yet chose to turn away. That was the moment I stopped hoping she would save me. That was the moment I realized I was utterly alone, trapped between his cruelty and her betrayal, with no escape in sight. After that night, when I saw my mother close the door, something inside me broke forever. Whatever hope had survived was buried in that silence. From then on, the abuse was no longer hidden or disguised. It became part of the daily rhythm of the house, woven into the routine like cooking meals or sweeping the floor. My mother no longer pretended not to know. She prepared me for him, almost like she was arranging chores, as if my pain were another household duty she had to keep in order. She told me to bathe, to comb my hair, to stay in my room. Her voice was calm, steady, almost casual. It was the calm of someone who had accepted the unbearable and expected me to do the same. I learned quickly that my body did not belong to me. It belonged to him, and it belonged to her silence. The house itself became a stage where cruelty played over and over again. The wooden bed creaked with every movement. The dim light cast shadows across the wall that felt like they were mocking me. Even the smell of soap and clean sheets made me sick, because I knew they were only cleaned to erase the evidence. My mother would wash the bloodstains with her own hands, her face blank, as if she was scrubbing away not only the fabric but the truth itself. There were nights when I thought sickness would save me. Once I had a fever so high that my skin burned and my body shook. I hoped, prayed even, that the illness would grant me a night of peace. My mother placed a damp cloth on my forehead, and for a fleeting moment I thought I saw care in her eyes. But when he entered the room, she left. She closed the door behind her and left me trembling in sweat and delirium. That night he told me he was cleansing me, taking the sickness out of me, that this was for my own good. His words were poison, his hands were knives, and when it was over I was weaker than ever. My fever raged, my body felt broken, but my soul was shattered beyond recognition. It was not only the nights that tormented me, it was the days too. At school, I tried to disappear. I wore long sleeves, even in the sweltering heat, hiding bruises and scratches that burned against the fabric. My classmates whispered about how strange I was. I did not join their games. I did not laugh. I barely spoke. They thought I was unfriendly. In truth, I was surviving. Teachers sometimes noticed, but in that time, people rarely interfered in what they believed were family matters. And in a town where appearances meant everything, my mother had built a shield of respectability so strong that no one dared to doubt her. The cruelty was not only in what he did, but in the way my mother enabled him. Sometimes she even created situations for him. She would scold me for not sweeping the yard well enough or for speaking out of turn, and those invented failures became his excuses. She handed me over like I was an object that needed correction, and the word she used haunted me: correction. She called what he did correction, as if I were a broken child that needed fixing. Imagine being 10 years old and hearing your own mother say that you deserved what was happening, that you provoked it, that it was your fault. That is the kind of wound that never heals, because it is carved deeper than the skin. It is cut straight into the soul. As time went on, her complicity became even clearer. She stopped hiding her role. She made sure I was ready. She straightened the sheets afterward. She treated my visible bruises with ointment so no one would ask questions at school. It was as if the house had transformed into a machine where every detail served a purpose. The bed, the sheets, the soap, the silence, even her hands, all of it worked together to keep the secret alive. And I was trapped in the center of it, powerless, voiceless, hopeless. There were moments when I tried to resist. Once I ran toward the front door in desperation, hoping I could reach the street, hoping someone would hear me. My mother blocked the way. Her face was cold, her body firm. She told me to go back. She told me I was exaggerating, that I should stop making things harder than they already were. She pushed me toward him, like a shepherd returning a lost sheep. That was when I realized she was not simply ignoring what was happening. She was an active part of it. She had chosen her side, and it was not mine. Nights blended into years. I stopped dreaming because dreams hurt too much. Even sleep was no longer safe. I woke from nightmares soaked in sweat, the sound of footsteps still echoing in my head. The fear began to live inside my body like a second skin. My hands trembled constantly. My stomach churned whenever I heard the floor creak. Even the ordinary objects around the house became weapons in my mind. A broom, a belt, a chair. I never knew what he might use next. Everything around me was a threat, and there was no corner to hide. The betrayal of a mother is a scar that does not fade. Children can forgive many things, but not the moment when the person who gave them life decides that their suffering is acceptable. She was supposed to be my shield, but instead she became the key that locked the door behind me. And every time she walked away, every time she folded the sheets, every time she whispered excuses to the neighbors, she was carving deeper wounds into my soul than any hand ever could. What I carried in those years was not only the pain of his violence, but the knowledge that I had been abandoned by the one person I trusted most. That knowledge was heavier than any bruise, more suffocating than any threat. It sat in my chest like a stone, reminding me day after day that I was utterly alone. And with each passing night, I understood more clearly that if I did not find a way out, there would be nothing left of me to save. I had already accepted that my life was made of silence, that every day was just a countdown until night returned and the cycle began again. I had stopped believing that anyone could see me, that anyone would care enough to ask what was wrong. And then one day, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon at school, a small crack of light broke through the darkness. My teacher, a woman with sharp eyes and a gentle voice, stopped me after class. She looked at me in a way no one had before. Her eyes lingered not on my clothes, not on my homework, but on me. She asked a simple question: "Are you all right?" Those words tore through the wall I had built inside myself. I wanted to lie, to say yes because that was safer, but my body betrayed me. Tears poured out before I could stop them. My shoulders shook and I could not speak. She touched my arm softly, not in the rough way I had grown used to, but with tenderness. That touch made me collapse. For the first time in years, I felt that maybe I was not invisible. Maybe someone could hear me after all. It took time before I could speak, but slowly I let the words out. The first confession was broken, scattered, whispered in fragments. I told her I was hurt, that my nights were not safe, that my mother was not who people thought she was. My teacher listened without interrupting, without looking away. She did not tell me to be quiet. She did not scold me. She believed me. That simple act of belief was a miracle. When a child has been silenced for so long, being believed feels like oxygen rushing back into lungs that had been suffocating. From that moment, my teacher became my anchor. She told me I was brave, though I did not feel brave. She told me I deserved better, though I had never allowed myself to imagine what better looked like. She promised me that what was happening was not my fault. Her words cut through the poison I had been fed for years. For the first time, I began to understand that the shame I carried was not mine to bear. It belonged to them, not to me. But telling the truth did not mean I was free. The walls of my house still stood around me, and he still controlled every night. My mother still watched and turned away. I was terrified that if I spoke too loudly, if the wrong person found out, I would pay a price worse than anything I had already endured. The teacher understood this. She did not rush me. Instead, she began to guide me toward the possibility of escape. She asked questions carefully, gently, trying to collect details that could help. She knew that to stop him, evidence would be needed, and that idea terrified me. It meant I would have to endure again, but this time with my eyes open, knowing it was the only way to end it. The plan began in secret, whispered in the quiet moments after class when no one else was listening. We talked about what objects he used, about where the bruises appeared, about the times when it was most likely to happen. Every detail felt like tearing a wound open again, but I pushed through because I could sense a door beginning to open, a door I had thought was locked forever. There was one particular object he used, one that had left marks too specific to ignore, a belt with a broken buckle, sharp enough to cut skin. He thought of it as discipline, but I knew it as terror. That belt became my proof. My teacher explained that if I could show what was done to me, if I could reveal the truth, then people in power would have no choice but to act. It was a terrifying thought, but it was also a chance, and chances were rare in my world. I remember the night I decided. I lay awake, my body trembling, knowing he would come again. This time, instead of begging silently for it to end, I forced myself to remember every detail. I memorized the sound of the buckle, the way it sliced into the air before striking. I counted the bruises blooming across my skin. I forced myself to stay awake, to burn every second into my memory. It was agony, but it was also purpose. For the first time, my pain was not only suffering, it was evidence. The following day, I showed my teacher the marks. She touched them with such care that I nearly collapsed. She did not look at me with disgust, as I had always feared. She looked at me with fire in her eyes. She told me this had to end, and that she would help me make it end. Those words wrapped around me like armor. For years, I had been stripped of all power, and suddenly, with her belief, I felt the faintest spark of strength return. Still, fear never left. Every step toward truth felt like walking on glass. At home, I continued the routine, keeping silent, obeying, hiding the plan in the back of my mind. But inside, I was no longer the same girl. I was waiting, preparing, holding on to the promise that someone finally stood on my side. That knowledge gave me a kind of courage I had never felt before. It was fragile, but it was real. The night that followed was one of the hardest of my life. I endured again, but this time I knew that his cruelty was no longer invisible. I was not alone in the shadows anymore. Someone else had seen, someone else had believed, and that meant the truth was out there. No matter how much he or my mother tried to bury it, I held on to that thought with everything I had, like a rope pulling me out of the pit I had been thrown into. What came after would change everything. The cycle I thought was unbreakable was about to fracture. For the first time in years, I dared to imagine a different future, even if it was just a whisper of a dream. A life beyond the walls of that house. A life where the door would finally open, and I would not be forced to face the monster again. That night, when he came into my room again, I was no longer the same fragile child who had endured in silence for years. My body still trembled, my heart still raced, but there was something new burning inside me. I carried the memory of my teacher's voice, the promise that I was not invisible, that I was not crazy, that what was being done to me was real and wrong and could finally end. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that this horror was not forever, and that belief gave me strength. I endured the cruelty of that night with eyes wide open, forcing myself to hold on to every detail. The sound of the belt buckle scraping, the sting of the leather, the way my skin burned as red marks rose across my body. I memorized everything, not as a victim but as a witness. Each second was agony, but I clung to the thought that this was the last time I would face it in silence. My pain had a purpose now. My suffering was no longer buried in shame. It was evidence. It was truth. It was the weapon that would finally free me. The following day, my teacher saw the bruises again, and this time she acted quickly. She contacted others, people with authority, people who could no longer ignore what was happening. I still remember the moment I realized the walls of that prison were about to fall. The sound of heavy boots entering the house, but not his boots this time. It was the police. Men in uniform, their faces stern, their presence heavy with justice. For years I had heard the sound of the door closing me into darkness, but that day I heard a door open wide and the air rushed in like I was breathing for the first time. He was taken away in handcuffs. I can still see his face, twisted with anger, shouting, promising that I would regret this. But for the first time, his words did not control me. For the first time, I saw him powerless. And in that moment, I realized that monsters are not invincible. They fall when the truth is spoken. They fall when someone finally dares to see what they have hidden. And then there was my mother. She stood in the kitchen, pale, shaking, her eyes empty. She did not run to me, did not hold me, did not apologize. She avoided my gaze, as if my face reminded her of every choice she had made, every betrayal she had committed. When they took her away too, accused of aiding and allowing it all to happen, I felt no joy, no triumph. I only felt the weight of what had been lost. I lost a mother long before the police came. That day only confirmed it. In the days that followed, I was taken into the arms of strangers who showed me more kindness in 1 week than my own mother had in years. Nurses who touched my skin with care instead of cruelty. Social workers who spoke softly, who brought me warm meals, who told me I was safe. For the first time in so long, I slept without fear. I woke without dread. The silence in the night was not heavy anymore. It was gentle, the kind of silence that wraps you in peace instead of suffocating you. Healing did not happen overnight. The scars on my body faded, but the scars on my soul stayed. I spent years learning to trust again, learning that not every hand reaching toward me meant harm, that not every closed door meant abandonment. I struggled with nightmares, with doubts, with the deep wound of betrayal from the woman who should have protected me. But slowly, through the voices of people who cared, through therapy, through prayer, through the passage of time, I rebuilt myself. Now, as an old woman, I still carry the weight of those memories, but I also carry something stronger. I carry survival. I carry resilience. I carry the proof that even in the deepest darkness, a spark of hope can change everything. That spark was my teacher, who saw me when no one else did. That spark was the courage inside me that I did not know I had. That spark was the truth, which no amount of silence could bury forever. To those who hear my story, I want to say this. If you are living in silence, if you are carrying pain no one else sees, you are not alone. Your story matters. Your voice matters. And even when it feels impossible, there is always a way out. Sometimes it takes one person who dares to see you, one person who believes you, one person who gives you strength to take the first step. And once that step is taken, the chains can break. I survived not because I was stronger than what happened to me, but because I chose to keep breathing when everything inside me wanted to stop. That choice, day after day, is what brought me here. And if I could endure, if I could find freedom, then you can too. Do not give up. Do not believe the lies that you are worthless. You are more powerful than you know, and your survival is proof of that power. Thank you for listening to my story, for carrying a piece of my truth with you. It means that silence has been broken once again, and every time it is broken, the darkness loses its grip. If this story touched you, if you felt the pain and the hope within it, I invite you to stay with us, because there are more voices, more stories, more truths that deserve to be heard. Do not forget to subscribe to this channel, not just for me, but for every survivor whose story is waiting to be told. Together we can give strength to those who still live in silence, and together we can prove that no one is ever truly alone. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next story that is already waiting for you on the screen.